It begins with the sound of breathing. Slow, wet, uneven, the kind that doesn't come from one person, but several, as though a dozen lungs are sharing the same air. Inside the sagging house at the base of the Ozark hills, something moves beneath the floorboards. Boards that have rotted through twice over, boards that have known births, deaths, and things that never fit neatly in between. The smell is what reaches you first. Not rot exactly, but the dense, humid scent of something fermenting, life folded in on itself too many times. They say if you walked past that house before dawn, you'd see a lantern flicker in the upstairs window, swaying slightly as though carried by a hand that's forgotten what light is for. A hand that has touched too many of its own blood. The screams came first in winter, short, sharp, muffled. Then the singing. A high, pitched hum that didn't seem to come from mouths, but from the walls themselves. Neighbors, what few there were, would stop along the dirt road, listening, unsure if it was a hymn or a cry. But no one ever went up the path. Not after the last time. When the sheriff's deputy had stepped through that door back in 1932, he came back white as lime, whispering something about faces too alike to be natural. He said the family inside didn't blink when he spoke, only stared, as though waiting for him to say something they already knew. He didn't go back, and no one asked him to. That house had stood for nearly 70 years by then, weather, beaten and sagging, built by a man named Ephraim Gunter, though no one's sure that was his real name. He'd come to these hills after the war between the states, carrying with him a single woman and a child. From that one family tree grew a tangle of branches that never reached beyond the fence. Now, only 3 generations live beneath that same collapsing roof. 3, though counting them never feels right. Faces repeating, names reused until language itself buckled under the weight of blood. Outside, the air is still. The crickets have gone quiet. Inside, there's movement again, slow, synchronized, like an animal breathing through many mouths. Before we go further, take a moment. Look around you. Listen to what the night sounds like where you are. And tell me, which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Because by the time this story ends, the hour will matter more than you think. The Ozarks have a way of swallowing things. People, stories, sins. The land folds over itself like old parchment, concealing what it cannot cleanse. Out here, names fade quicker than gravestones, and graves are sometimes dug before the breath is gone. On the oldest county map that still includes this region, the Gunter property is marked by nothing more than a faint square drawn in fading pencil. No road name, no owner's note, only the outline of something that once mattered. The nearest town, Caledon Springs, sits 8 miles east, a town that thrived in the early 1900s, before the mines dried and the church bell cracked. Most of its buildings now are bones of wood, windows boarded or shattered, roofs bowed beneath the weight of decades. It was said that, before the rail line reached this far, before radios carried the voices of strangers through the air, families in these hills lived and died by their own rules. Isolation wasn't punishment, it was preservation. You took what the land gave, and you didn't ask for more. And if that meant marrying kin, well, blood was safer than outsiders. Outsiders brought questions, and questions could ruin a family faster than any drought. The Gunter farm sat in a hollow, where the sun never stayed long. Morning light arrived pale and reluctant, and by afternoon, the shadows returned to claim what was theirs. The house, a patchwork of unpainted boards, leaned slightly to one side, as though listening to the earth beneath it. Chickens used to roost in the rafters, A smokehouse stood behind it, its door hanging from one hinge, and beyond that, a field where nothing but thistle grew anymore. Old records mention Ephraim Gunter's name only once, in an 1881 deed transfer, where the buyer and seller shared the same surname. By the time census men came through in the early 1900s, the household listed 11 people, 4 adults, 7 children, and a note scrawled in the margin. Our relations unclear. That confusion didn't fade. Each generation folded into the next like pages too damp to separate. Their dialect shifted into something half forgotten. Part English, part echo. Outsiders claimed they could understand the words, but not the meaning. In 1912, a doctor from Caledon Springs rode out to the property after reports of a stillborn child. He returned with nothing but a strange description in his ledger. Infant pale, head misshapen, eyes grey and clouded. Mother appears young. Father uncertain. After that, the records stopped mentioning births entirely. But the family grew, and the house seemed to expand with them, boards nailed over doors that led nowhere, rooms locked from the inside. Some say you could hear movement through the walls at night. Not rats, not wind, something heavier, deliberate, dragging itself between generations. By 1923, the Gunter name had become little more than a whisper that trailed through the valleys. No one spoke it outright, not even in the stores where gossip was a form of currency. Yet everyone in Caledon Springs knew what it meant: kin too close, too long. That was the year a child was born who changed the way the town looked at the hills forever. Her name was Ada. At least, that's what the doctor wrote. The family never used it. They called her Little One, and no one beyond that roof ever saw her again. She came into the world during the first frost of November, the midwife riding 3 miles by mule just to reach the door. When she stepped inside, the smell of kerosene and iron hit her so hard she almost turned back. The mother lay on a cot by the fire, pale, trembling, eyes unfocused. The man standing beside her might have been her husband, or her brother, or both. No one told her which. The baby was small, almost weightless, her cry thin and strained, like breath through a cracked reed. But what froze the midwife's hands was her face. The features seemed to repeat. Eyes too symmetrical, mouth too narrow. The nose a perfect copy of the man's standing over her. It wasn't beauty or deformity. It was repetition. The midwife left before the sun rose, and by the time she reached town, her hair had gone grey at the roots. She never took another job in the hills. Neighbors claimed they could sometimes hear the child at night, not crying, but humming, a soft, wordless tune that seemed to echo from the soil itself. They said animals avoided the property after she was born. Even the dogs refused to hunt near the creek that bordered their land. When Ada was 5, a traveling preacher wandered too far into the hollow. He returned to town 2 days later, clothes torn, eyes red from weeping. He said he'd seen a little girl standing in the doorway of that house, watching him without blinking. He tried to speak to her, but she turned her head slowly, like something was whispering into her ear from the dark. And when he looked past her shoulder, he swore he saw faces, dozens of them, layered behind her in the shadows, as though the generations themselves were watching through her eyes. He left the ministry that same month. From then on, no one from Caledon Springs went near the Gunter property. But stories don't need visitors to grow. They breed in silence, just like the family did. By the time Ada reached her 12th year, the hills around the Gunter property had grown silent in a way that felt deliberate. Birds no longer nested in the eaves. The creek behind the house ran black with silt, and in summer, a haze of rot hovered just above the waterline. Inside the house, something had begun to change. Ada's mother, if she was her mother, had grown thin and distant, her hair falling out in grey strands. The old man, Ephraim's son, moved through the halls with a limp, muttering scripture that no one else seemed to know. The rest of the family, the cousins, uncles, half-siblings who slept shoulder to shoulder, spoke in a private language now, one built of half, breathed sounds and glances. It was around this time that a traveling photographer came through the Ozarks, documenting mountain families for a government project. He'd heard rumors of the Gunters, but thought them little more than backwoods myth. He found the house by accident, or fate, depending on how you see it, his car broken down near the hollow at dusk. He knocked, calling for help, and a girl's voice answered from inside. He would later say it didn't sound like a child's voice at all. When the door opened, Ada stood there, her skin white as candle wax, her hair the color of straw left too long in the sun. Behind her, the air shimmered as though with heat, though it was autumn cold. The photographer lifted his camera, thinking only of light and shadow, but before he could focus the lens, a man's hand reached out of the dark and pushed it down. "Not here," the man said. His tone wasn't angry, only final. Still, the photographer took one picture, secretly, as he left the property. The negative would later reveal something he hadn't seen at the time. Ada, standing on the porch, her face expressionless, and behind her, through the warped glass of a window, 3 faces reflected, all identical to hers. He sent the photograph to the county office, hoping for some official curiosity. None came. The image was filed away in a drawer marked unverified. But it didn't end there. That same winter, townsfolk began to speak of strange lights flickering in the woods near the Gunter place. Small fires that burned without smoke, moving in deliberate patterns. Some said it was foxfire, others whispered of ritual. A hunter who wandered too close one night claimed he saw a circle of figures standing around the old well, heads bowed, their hands clasped together as if in prayer. In the center of the ring, a girl stood barefoot on the stones, her lips moving soundlessly. He swore the ground beneath her seemed to pulse, like something living was trapped just below the surface. The next morning, the well was sealed with stones, and Ada, the strange child who had once hummed to the night, was no longer seen outside again. When Ada vanished from sight, no one went looking. Not her kin, not the town, not the county men who'd once promised to check on things out that way. In the Ozarks, disappearance was never proof of death, only of distance. And for the Gunters, distance was something they'd long ago stopped fearing. By 1939, the Hollow had become a world unto itself. The family lived entirely off what the soil gave them, and what the soil took back. The men trapped small game in rusted snares, their hands cracked and pale. The women tended a patch of root vegetables that grew in strange, twisted shapes, as though the earth beneath was remembering every buried thing. And in the center of it all, the house sagged like a dying lung. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the faint metallic sting of blood. Meat hung drying from the rafters, though no one could say what kind. The walls were lined with crude carvings, circles intersecting with crosses, symbols burned into the wood with iron. To anyone else, they would look like madness, but to the Gunters they were language. At night, the family gathered in the main room beneath a single lantern. There, the eldest, Ada's grandfather, though no one called him that aloud, would open a leather, bound book that no preacher had ever seen. Its pages were filled not with scripture, but names. Dozens of them, repeated, shuffled, combined, rewritten. Sometimes one name would stretch across an entire page, copied over and over in a trembling hand until the ink bled through. Each night, he would read from it in a low, rhythmic tone, and the others would hum along. Some said they could hear that sound from miles away, a droning lullaby that didn't belong to any hymn or language. It was during one of these gatherings that Ada returned. Not from the woods, not from any road, but from inside the house itself. A child no more, though her face had not aged a day. Her eyes were clouded now, the grey of river water after rain. She stepped into the lantern's light and spoke a single phrase in that strange, rolling cadence the family used. The old man smiled, closed the book, and kissed her forehead. The humming stopped. No one outside that house ever saw Ada again after that night. Not as a child, not as a woman. But soon, the family began to grow once more. Infants appeared without explanation. The men grew quiet, the women thinner, their faces drawn into that same pale sameness. The town whispered again that perhaps Ada had never died, only changed. That the bloodline had turned in on itself, so tightly it no longer needed birth. Something had learned to make more of itself, and from that point on, the Gunters didn't bury their dead. They built new rooms instead. By 1947, the house had doubled in size. No one saw the work being done, yet each season it grew. Boards added, porches extended, windows sealed. To those who passed by, it seemed less like a home and more like a living organism, spreading out across the hill as if it were trying to breathe through new lungs. The sheriff once sent 2 men to deliver a census form. They rode out before dawn, armed and cautious, but only one returned. The man who made it back, a deputy named Lang, refused to speak of what he'd seen for nearly a year. When he finally did, the words came slow, trembling. He said the air changed near the Gunter property, the way it does before a storm. Heavy, electric, close. He called out before approaching the porch, and someone answered. But it wasn't a voice calling to him. It was a voice calling through him, like a word whispered behind his ear, but echoing in his chest. Inside the doorway stood a woman, barefoot, eyes pale as milk. She didn't blink. Behind her, he could see shapes moving in the dark, in slow, circling patterns, as though the walls themselves were breathing. Lang tried to hand over the census form, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she said, "The count is done. The circle is whole." He dropped the paper and ran. The man who'd gone in with him never came back. When the sheriff went up 3 days later, he found the deputy's horse tied to a fence post, saddle empty, reins knotted into the wood, as if he'd been taken from it gently. After that, no lawman went near the hollow again. Over the years, people began to notice other things, subtle, creeping changes. The creek that ran through town began to dry each summer, but the one near the Gunter land never did. Children born in Caledon Springs came into the world with pale irises, even if their parents' eyes were brown. And every so often, when a storm passed through, the air would carry a smell like wet iron and old roots. Some said it was the soil remembering. Others said the Gunters had become something else entirely. In 1952, a hiker from Little Rock went missing near those woods. When searchers finally found his camera weeks later, there were 12 photographs, undeveloped inside. The first 11 were nothing: blurred trees, river stones, overexposed sky. But the last one showed a structure in the distance, lit faintly by the moon. A house that didn't seem built so much as grown. The boards warped, the roofline sagging into the earth, the windows reflecting nothing but themselves. And in one of those windows, a girl stood, hair the color of ash, eyes white, mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. When the photo was printed, the technician swore the girl's hand reached closer each time he looked at it. He quit that same week. By the turn of the decade, the Gunter property had been erased from every county map. But the house was still there, waiting, growing, humming softly beneath the soil. And in Caledon Springs, when the wind moves down from the hills after midnight, you can still hear her, not crying, not laughing, just humming that same wordless tune. The one Ada began, the one the earth never forgot. It was nearly a century later when the silence broke. In the autumn of 2021, a restoration crew contracted by the state arrived in Caledon Springs. The county had sold most of the surrounding land to a development company, hoping to turn the region into a retreat for hikers. Heritage tourism. None of them knew the history. Not really. They'd only seen the aerial surveys, dense oak forest, one collapsed structure, no registered occupants. The locals warned them not to start in the hollow. But paperwork doesn't carry superstition. On the third day, while clearing brush near the foundation, one of the workers, a man named Cole, struck something solid beneath the soil. It wasn't rock, it was wood, thick, reinforced, almost black from years of moisture. A trapdoor, sealed with 4 rusted bolts. When they pried it open, a current of cold air rushed out, heavy, metallic, and old. The smell hit them first iron and mold, like something preserved far too long. Beneath, a narrow stairway led into darkness. They descended with flashlights. The steps went down farther than any basement should have. 30, maybe 40 feet below the earth. And at the bottom, they found a room. The walls were smooth, lined with clay jars sealed with wax. Every surface was etched with those same concentric symbols, once burned into the family's home. In the center stood a wooden table, and upon it, an object covered in cloth. When they lifted the cloth, they found an old reel-to-reel tape recorder, still intact, still humming. Cole pressed play. At first, there was nothing, just static, the hiss of time. Then, faintly, a child's voice began to hum. The same tune that had drifted through those hills a century before. As the hum continued, another sound began beneath it. Whispering, layered and low, growing in number. Dozens of voices, speaking in that broken, circular language that no one alive could translate. The tape crackled, warped, then cut to silence. But the recorder didn't stop spinning. They took the reel back to town, where the sheriff's office logged it into evidence. Within a week, 3 of the men from that dig site fell ill. Fevers, insomnia, hearing music that wasn't there. Cole, the one who'd pressed play, was found sitting in his truck 2 towns over, eyes open, still humming. The recording was sent to the state archive for preservation, but within days, the archivist assigned to it resigned. He claimed that when he slowed the audio down by half, he could hear something breathing beneath the hum. Rhythmic, like a pulse. The last line of his written report read only this: "The voice isn't coming from the child. It's coming from the room." Today, the Gunter Hollow remains fenced off. No building permits, no trespassing allowed. But on windless nights, hikers still swear they hear faint music rising from the valley floor. A low, steady hum that vibrates through the soil, matching their heartbeat step for step. They say the earth, they're never fully cooled. That the line never ended. That the Gunters didn't vanish. They went inward. And that somewhere beneath the hollow, the recorder is still playing. They say the tape was moved 3 times before it disappeared. Once to the county archive, once to the university in Fayetteville, and finally, to a private collection under government seal. No one knows who signed the transfer order, but 6 months later, a graduate researcher cataloging the Fayetteville archives found a second reel misfiled inside a weather log from 1912. No label, no return address, only a handwritten note inside the box that read, "The hum changes when you listen alone." When the reel was digitized, analysts noticed something impossible. The background has carried fluctuations that matched seismic data from the Ozark plateau. Tremors too faint to register as earthquakes, pulsing in perfect rhythm with the tape's playback. Every time the hum looped, the readings grew stronger. The researcher who uncovered the anomaly went missing 2 days later. The footage from the lab security camera ends at 2:03 a.m. The final frame shows her sitting motionless, headphones on, eyes open, one hand reaching for the volume dial. When investigators arrived, the chair was empty, but the recorder was still running. The audio recovered from that night contained 37 seconds of silence, followed by a faint breath, and a child's voice whispering a single word, "Ada." The frequency analysis showed that the whisper contained layers far below human range, patterns that mirrored the structure of human DNA. After that, the state sealed the file under the designation Project Caledon. But there are still copies. Fragments uploaded anonymously, surfacing every few years on forgotten corners of the internet. Each one slightly different. Each one slightly longer. And those who've listened claim that, after the 4th or 5th loop, they can hear something beneath the hum. A quiet tapping, as though someone were knocking from the inside of the recording itself. The locals say it's the Gunters calling back, not for help, but for continuation. That whatever lived in that house had learned to move through sound, through rhythm, through anything that could carry a pattern. The earth remembers, and sound is only the earth thinking out loud. If you ever find one of those files, you'll know it. The audio begins with static, then silence, then a single low hum that settles in your bones. Listen long enough, and you might start to hear your own name forming beneath it. Stretched, repeated, reshaped. That's when you stop the tape. Or you don't. Because maybe the Gunters weren't cursed. Maybe they were chosen to show us what happens when blood remembers itself too well. And maybe the hum still waits, below the soil of Caledon Springs, repeating that first word in a voice older than any family.